Okay, I mean, I can see here the number of participants still growing steadily now at 5 o'clock, so people are pouring in. Obviously, this event would not be a proper online event if there weren't any technical difficulties in the beginning, so I guess that's part of the charm. But okay, in that case, I have the honor then to open the opening week in Philip Thaer's stead. My name is Yannis Panayotidis. I'm the scientific director of RECET. So if Philip is the founding director, as Irena mentioned, and Irena Remespensky, who's your technical support for today, she's our managing director. So you're getting to know all the directors here. So I'm the scientific director. So I'm in charge of operative business, if you will, and well, I have the great honor to welcome you all, first of all, to this event, to this first of a series of events this week, in which we are going to to introduce our new institution and our research, and of course, in the course of this week, we will get to hear a lot of exciting talks, and we will enter into some very interesting debates about questions of transformation, broadly speaking. And of course, transformation is, well, it is the buzzword that this institution is all about. It is what the T in RECET or RECET stands for, the Research Center for the History of Transformations. We're talking about a term here which has a long history in itself, and we will learn a bit more about this history and the transformations of transformation on Friday, when we have a sociologist roundtable on the issue. The notion of transformation that we are working with, broadly speaking, is the transformation as the great, as used in the Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi. And here I have to sort of paraphrase, I guess, what Philip would have said, who gained this inspiration from this classic work of political economy by the great scholar Karl Polanyi, who wrote about essentially the relationship of economics and society in times of radical change. And those are really the issues that we deal here with as well. When we talk about transformation, of course, in a context of Eastern Europe, we automatically think about the time since 1989. And of course, this is sort of the pivot of our research and the starting point for sure, but it doesn't end there. We look at points in time, at time, sort of at a long duration perspective, both before and after 1989. We also look at other historical ruptures. So we will have on Friday also a lecture by Larry Wolff on 1918 and the transformations in Central and Eastern Europe after 1918. But we also look beyond Central and Eastern Europe. We engage in or we embrace the paradigm of comparative area studies, which you will also hear a little bit more about in the course of this opening. And so we also look at other world regions, like for instance East Asia, which is obviously a place where a lot of transformations have been going on over these past years, and where we're looking forward to a lot of very interesting research collaborations. Now, before I pass the word to Claudia Kraft, who is Vice Director of RECET, let me also mention that this institute, or this center, would not exist without the Wittgenstein Award by the FWF. so the Austrian Science Foundation, or Science Fund, which Philip Thaer won in 2019, and he invested this money wisely, we believe, in this center here. Also generously supported by the University of Vienna. And yeah, we have started our trajectory now under, well, difficult circumstances in many ways, given the pandemic condition. But on the other hand, to see a silver lining, we have an international audience here tonight that we might not have had, or certainly would not have had under normal conditions. So we're really making the best out of a difficult situation. Now let me pass the word to Claudia for a few introductory remarks also.
Wait a minute. Thank you very much. And I'm very glad to see you in the end here all on Zoom. It's a pleasure to have you here all in Vienna. And I just want to elaborate very briefly about transformation, not only in regard to the transformation of 1989, which of course comes to our mind when we're thinking about transformation, but I want to remind us that we are also doing what we are also doing at RECET, and that is challenging the allegedly clear-cut caesuras, as for instance is the iconic year of 1989. We are also emphasizing the role of historical legacies in order to understand how historical actors used experiences for coping with radical change, but also how actors were restrained not only by historical experiences, but also by institutional settings or normative orders in the process of perceiving and understanding rapid transformations. We are convinced that only a perspective that transcends caesuras, as for instance 1918, 1949, 1999, and takes past historical experiences seriously, can contribute to advancing methodological debates between supporters of any kind of past dependency and scientists who emphasize more the importance of historical contingency and the agency of actors. If one wants to understand how historical actors behave in the face of the demands of rapid political or economic change, one has to realize that expectations about the future always depend on historical experience. The study of more recent historical transformations enormously benefits from such diachronic perspectives. And by the way, one of the events of our opening week will be Larry Wolff's lecture about the transformations of Eastern Europe after 1918, taking place this Friday at 7 p.m. to make a short advertising announcement. In addition, RECET also benefits from interdisciplinary approaches that not only focus on historical experiences and their processing, but also ask about the patterns of social appropriation to be studied, for instance, in cultural and social anthropology, or the literary treatment of new experiences as described by literary studies. We are therefore very pleased that RECET cooperates closely with other institutions at Vienna University, such as, for instance, the interdisciplinary research platform for the study of transformations in Eastern Europe, where social and cultural science experts work on many of the questions that also interest RECET. We are happy to cooperate with our colleagues from the Faculty of Social Sciences, as well as from the Faculty of Philological and Cultural Studies, because we are convinced that only a multidimensional depth perspective does justice to the complexity of transformation processes. But there are also cooperation partners beyond Vienna University. And therefore now I hand over the floor to our colleagues Mario Holzner and Michael Meyer from the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies and the Vienna University of Economics and Business.
Should I start then? Thank you very much. So it is really a great honor and a pleasure to be part of this very interesting endeavor, exciting path that we want to work here on together. I might say just a few words on the Institute. The Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies was founded in 1972, and we focused on the economic analysis of the countries in Central, East, and Southeast Europe. And in this capacity, we are also very happy that we have already a first joint project with RECET, where we want to analyze and digitize the WIW's research reports from before 1991, as well as the database from that time. So I think that will be an interesting beginning, and we will then open up this information also to the broad public. The project will go on in the next 3 years. So thank you very much, and all the best for RECET.
Oh, Claudia Graf, thank you so much for inviting us, for inviting me to give a brief statement on our institute. Michael Meyer from WU Vienna, Vienna University of Economics and Business, but we are not dealing what is expected from management and economics guys. We are dealing with civil society in my institute. We are working and researching and teaching about non-profit organizations and civil society organizations. And we do have some focus on Central Eastern Europe, as we have established what we call the NGO Academy, which is a capacity building program together with Erste Foundation for leaders of various civil society organizations from the Western Balkans to Moldova. In this role, we have also done some research on how society has developed in Central Eastern Europe. And so we are very keen and very honored on the collaboration with RECET. And I think that transformations and the history of transformations and learning about how economy and society has dealt with transformations and has been impacted with by these radical historical changes is very important for the future, as we are definitely facing transformations ahead when we are thinking of climate change and how our economy and societies have to change. If we want to save this world, then many transformations are ahead, and I hope we can learn a lot from what RECET reveals about transformations. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Meyer, for for introducing your institution, and Mario Holzner, of course, as well. We now want to seize the opportunity before we start with Professor Kocka's lecture to also present ourselves as a team a little bit, because RECET has a team of young and upcoming researchers who work on different topics in different research fields, which we now would like to briefly introduce to you. So what we'll do now is you will now hear brief presentations by 6 of our researchers on the 5 research areas that we have defined, and also on the comparative area studies approach that I mentioned, which we embrace and which you can, as I mentioned, can find reflected in our program as well. So now I would like to pass the word first to my colleague Rosie Johnston, and from there we hear the different research areas back to back. Rosie, please.
Okay, so if everyone can hear me, and I hope they can, I would like to present to you a little bit about what we're doing in the research cluster, Labour Relations and Transformation from Below. So this cluster takes its inspiration from the idea that transformation is a macro process with micro level consequences. And we're also kind of interrogating whether the kind of vector of causality might work a little bit the other way. In order to understand this relationship better, we are examining the little transformations that take place largely, but certainly not exclusively in the workplace, and that together combine to create a so-called great transformation. We're exploring, as has been mentioned already, the shift from socialism to capitalism, but also the adoption of neoliberal ideas in the workplace and how this might have affected labour relations, which is a process, as has already been stated, that doesn't always map perfectly onto the revolutions in East Central Europe of 1989. It was a project originally on shipbuilding in several East European port cities, which launched this avenue of research, as it were. And as an industry which is global in both its orientation and competition, this project seems ripe for further expansion, perhaps into a kind of East European, East Asian comparative area. And as has been noted, these two areas are of particular interest to RECET at the moment. My own project in this field is on the Czechoslovak arms trade, which in its heyday connected the Czechoslovak provinces to the Cold War's flashpoints, and in more recent years presents a case study in what Philip Terra has called the growing inequality on a spatial level wrought by the adoption of neoliberal reforms in East Central Europe. And a third and final project currently kind of in this research cluster is Peter Wegenschimmel's work on Trucking Europe, which examines the transformations of European freight companies from the 1980s to present. So that's all about labour relations and transformations from below. And now I think over to Frederick.
Yes, Janos Kovac, Lukas Becht, and myself, we form a small team of intellectual and economic historians bound together by our common interest in economic thought and reform politics, which is another one of RECET's key research areas. And the common denominator of our research is the evolution of socialist economics in periods of political and social transformation and its afterlife until today. Janos Kovac is not only a senior researcher at RECET, he's also one of the members of the board. He's currently working on the topic of collectivist economic thought during and after socialism. Now, this research is conducted in the framework of a much larger international cooperation project, which is entitled From Between Bukharin and Balcerovich, approaching the history of socialist economic thought from a comparative angle. And this project has also yielded its own book series published by Lexington Books. As a project coordinator of the Economic Collectivism Project, our colleague Lukas Becht is closely linked to Janos' research, but at the same time is also finishing his own PhD project at the moment on the evolution of Polish futurology before and after 1989. Lukas investigates how prognostic research in Poland reacted to the demise of the socialist order and the fading belief in rational planning, and so also in the predictability of the future. I am myself currently wrapping up a project on Soviet Estonian reform debates. This is a book project which attempts to revisit perestroika from the margins and to explain the impact of Estonia's descent into capitalism on the post-socialist transformation. And a little announcement: from July onwards, RECET will also host a project of a team of Austrian-Polish researchers jointly led by myself and my colleague Jerzy Kochanowski in Warsaw. And we will spend the next couple of years exploring the so-called Polonia firms, which were joint ventures established with capital investments of Poles living abroad. And I think that the focus on late socialist marketization and socialist globalization promises even greater synergies with the research of Lukas and Janos. Handing over to Yanis.
To Moimir, please.
It's my turn. Yeah. I hope everybody can hear me. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Moimir Stransky, and I would like to introduce our social movement and volunteerism group. Our focus on social movements and volunteering aims to broaden the discussion on this topic. to focus on previously neglected areas and to challenge some established categories as good, bad, or progressive or non-progressive activism, as well as modern or non-modern, in highlighting the different ways of civil society developments in West and East. My colleague Aga Pasieka is doing research on far-right civic activism in Central and Eastern Europe using historical and anthropological methodology. Her study strives to investigate the transnational dimension of far-right nationalists, the networking of ideologies, tactics, and modes of action. Entails archival research, interviews with the organization's members, and participant observation during nationalist gatherings and demonstrations. In this way, she aims to investigate the long-term relations between different far-right groups to develop a theoretical framework for an analysis of nationalist movements network today. In my study on voluntarism, I focus on the volunteer fire brigade in Czechoslovakia in order to shed light on the specific role of organized voluntarism in state socialism using historical methodology. I compare 3 medium-sized towns in the present-day Czech Republic and use archival material and interviews to specify the role of the volunteer fire brigade during the double transformation. The first one during the 1950s, and the second one after 1989, and the role of the fire brigade in the state socialist period, including their strong focus on the youth work. I'm also interested in the degree of voluntarism, Eigensinn, Thomas Lindenberger would say, or self-organization, as Maren Hachmeister says, that was possible under state socialism. And that will be all from my side. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Lynn, I suppose. Yeah, Lynn, please.
Can you all hear me and see me okay? So my name is Ling, and I'd like to tell you a bit about our research cluster, Migration, Mobility, and Transnationalism, that takes interest in how migration and mobility are interwoven with the transnationalization of societies in the wake of post-1989 changes, but also during the era of state socialism. So in doing so, our research area also brings into focus phenomena of socialist globalization. So all of this is reflected in our individual research that situates migration and mobility issues in broader historical contexts and shows how they shaped and at the same time were shaped by these concrete historical circumstances. Yanis Panagiotis, whom we already met, works on liberal orders and freedom of movement. Nino Ayvaisishvili-Gene is researching post-Soviet immigrant communities in Germany. Matthias Kaltenbrunner investigates the transnational market of used cars in Poland. Ilona Grabmeier examines migration, care, and mutual networks of support in Ukraine. And I work on the broad context between Poland and Vietnam during global socialism or global Cold War. So as you can see already here, in our research cluster, as well as RECET in general, we are committed to disciplinary, methodological, and regional diversity. And on top of our individual projects, we also run a reading group on migration and mobility, where we discuss current scholarship and spark further reflection on these and related topics. And probably soon we'll start inviting scholars who work on these topics to share their wonderful research with us, so stay tuned. And overall, in our research cluster, we aim to deepen our knowledge on migration and mobility as driving forces within, rather than as mere reactions to, the transformations that RECET as a center studies on a European and global scale. Thank you. I think now it's Stefanie, right?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me all? Very good. So the transformation of society, of course, also goes hand in hand with the transformation of culture, and especially cultural practices, which are crucially shaped and influenced by new impulses, no matter if in terms of resilience, of experimentation, or in contestation with old and new phenomena. And so RECET also traces cultural changes in Central and Eastern Europe and beyond, and thus integrating perspectives of new cultural history and cultural studies on, for example, music, with our colleague Dean Buletic's project on the socialist alternative of the Eurovision Song Contest, namely Intervision, or Magdalena Baranszowty's study on literary narratives of transformation in post-socialist Poland, or my own, that is Stephanie Weismann's project on smells, that is urban smellscapes under transformation and people's changing attitudes towards odors, be it industry or cosmetics or pickled cabbage. And all these stories and histories of cultural transformations are giving insight in how economic, political and social changes closely intersect and interact with cultural phenomena. And I think this also opens up the field for more interdisciplinary and more transregional approaches and possibilities. And here I'm already passing on to Sheng and RECET's yet another focus on the comparative area studies. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sheng Peng, and I study comparative area studies. Before I arrived in Vienna, I did my PhD on the history of military and dual-use technology transfer from the United States and Western Europe to China at the end of the Cold War. Under both the global context of China's rapprochement with the West, the Sino-Soviet rivalry, as well as the local context of China's own modernization efforts. And currently there are several research projects going on. The first one is a book chapter with Professor Janusz Kovacs on how both Western neoliberal economists as well as Eastern socialist economists have influenced the two very different market debates in both mainland China and Taiwan. In addition, I'm also very interested in looking at how the different endings of Cold War in both Western and Eastern Europe have affected China's effort to shape the post-Cold War multipolar international order. And lastly, there's a new exciting project with Professor Philip Thier, which will try to build a new research partnership with scholars from Fudan University to look at China's history of the shipyard industry. And I hope this comparative perspective could offer much needed insights into the transformation of 20th century stories. Here in Vienna, I also want to emphasize that this comparative study between Asia and Central Europe deserves more attention. And lastly, I want to share a story to point out that this comparative study is not new. In 1873, the Meiji Emperor of Japan sent a 107-man delegation to the United States and Europe to search for lessons for Japan's political reform. And they visited 13 countries in total and even attended the World's Fair in Vienna. In their comparative report, they have concluded that the American democratic system was far too chaotic and inefficient, while the Europeans, with their constitutional monarchy, offered a much better path for Japan, which also had an emperor. And curiously, 32 years later, in 1905, after lost a major war to Japan, the Chinese Empress Cixi decided to imitate her Japanese rivals and to learn from the Western powers. So urged by her advisors, Cixi sent China's own delegation to both America and Europe. And in Vienna, this delegation was also received by the court of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. In the end, the Chinese wrote their own report, concluded that actually the Japanese was correct. The Americans, with their Wild West spirit, had too much freedom for their own good. And Europe's constitutional monarchy worked better for China. And of course, I know our generation of scholars, no matter which field you came from, would draw far better lesson than our 20th century pioneers. But this cannot be done alone, and no one speaks all the languages and knows every cultural nuances. Thus, I would encourage you to make new friends here during our opening week, and I hope those virtual connections will become very fruitful in our future research and cultural enrichment. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sheng, and all the other researchers for presenting yourselves and our work. And now, actually, Philip Thier is finally with us and can listen and talk. So please, Philip, it's over to you now.
Yeah, thanks a lot. You know, today I had a fine transformative moment. It is like, you know, you go to bed on November 9, 1989 around 9 o'clock, and you wake up the next morning and suddenly the wall is open and you have missed it all. So I missed the opening of my own institute, but now I'm back. The reasons were probably prosaic. I think there was simply a cable broken in my office. And well, that was creating some trouble. Now we have another trouble that the university license for Zoom isn't working properly. And we would have had 150 or 180, I don't know how many people, and now we can only let 100 in, but I hope everybody will forgive us, and I will teach a lesson to the cable. I think RECET was introduced. You're all waiting for the speech of Professor Kocker, Jürgen Kocker. So I will be very, very brief. I'm sure Janis and Claudia, while I was biking home with on a speed bike, that's also transformative. We're introducing the institute very well. I've now heard to the, as we call ourselves RECETis, or the RECET members, and how they introduced all our research foci, you know, the more methodological issue about comparative area studies. This is more about the method. So comparing different countries, or rather case studies, actually small scale case studies around the world. And well, with transformations, all I wanted to add is, I don't know what Janis has already said, is of course we are still all influenced by the understanding of the term, how it was defined after '89. But first of all, there were earlier transformations. I'm sure Claudia Kraft talked about this. And then we also are in parts inspired by Polanyi, who of course is breaking these teleologies of marketization and liberal democracy. We know that history can end differently. And, you know, Sheng Peng just has also indirectly told us that, you know, the examples of the constitutional monarchies, and then suddenly they were washed away, you can say. There was another transformation towards democracy going on more than 100 years ago. Well, anyway, I wanted to do at least some honors. Well, the FWF, the Forschungsfonds President Christoph Gattinger, I think, is among us, or at least he announced to come. And then there's a Vice President Gerlinde Mautner. I hope they are not among those who are locked out because of the Zoom mishap. But anyway, thanks for paying such attention to us. I'm also very glad that the FWF is happy how we are developing, including, of course, our important partners. So thanks again to Michael Meyer cooperating.